Today we're going to have a conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about what we did and why. And the story is not me. The story is these folks who have brought OD into their environment to work on this project. So I would like to begin by talking about culture for a minute. You know, culture is kind of funny. Even if you watch the Cub games, the sportscasters were talking about the culture change with the Cubs. I'm like, what? That's just, you know, that's cool, but it's totally become a popular term. And I look at what we did as culture change. So, Mayor Langfelder, you began every one of the sessions with the same information. I'd love for you to share that with this group about your vision.
Well, give you the background. Jim Langfelder, Mayor of the City of Springfield, lifelong resident. And the City of Springfield went through a change of government from a commission form of government to the current form of government, which is aldermanic. And when I ran for office, I believe the disconnect between the city council or government and the community was that you have wards or aldermen representing their areas, but there's sometimes a disconnect looking at the benefit of, or the betterment of the community as a whole. So during the campaign, I said, well, we're going to have ward meetings and then try to tie all that strategic planning into the overall plan for the city. That way you're working individually with each alderman, and then collectively the alderman could see the needs of not only their areas, but the needs of the city as a whole, and then that's how you would prioritize the resources needed. So it's a great concept. I didn't know it was organizational development, but I just was just a firm believer that's the direction we needed to take. That way, from my standpoint, being mayor, it would give me a closer tie with each alderman, and then they could hopefully work better together as a council with the administration. So that was the impetus of moving this direction, and so we started it out kind of on a whim, and it's been successful. And thanks to my communications director, she said originally I think I was going to do it, and then she said no, you have to have someone unbiased come in from the outside to you know, add legitimacy to it, and then she made the introduction with Janet Kirby.
Thanks, and I didn't introduce, that was part of my job. Josh left that up to me and I didn't do it. Sorry, Josh. That's what you get. You know? In addition to Mayor Langfelder, we have Julia Frevert, who is the Director of Communications for the City of Springfield, and Mark Mahoney, who's Director of Public Works. Julia, would you talk about how we got started on this process, please?
The mayor did say that, I joke with him that he is the idea guy, and then he just passes it and says, get it done. So he did anticipate that he was going to lead the discussion with all the residents, and I think it would have changed the dynamic. My background is in integrated marketing communications, and I spent a long career in Chicago, and I saw how strategic planning processes worked and branding discussions worked, and you really needed that outside voice, especially when it came to talking about people's neighborhoods. It's very personal, and I felt that if either Mark facilitated the discussion or the mayor facilitated the discussion, it would have taken a totally different turn. And so I was familiar with actually Memorial's organizational development program, and they did the introduction with Benedictine and said Benedictine would be a great partner for this. And so we had a couple meetings, we discussed it, how you would facilitate it, and actually Amy, we broke down the schedule, and that's how we didn't know what we were going to get out of it, but it was a really great turnout.
Yeah. Mark, would you talk about, I mean, the mayor is the idea guy. Julia put this project on the ground. But you were affected because you're part of the mayor's staff, a servant of the city as well. Could you talk about how those meetings felt to you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't know there was going to be questions. The mayor invited me to lunch. That's why I'm here today.
Surprise.
That said,
There's no such thing as a free lunch, Mark.
Yeah, I found out. Yeah, from a public works perspective, we get obviously a lot of the services, and when these meetings, that the ward meetings sort of take it on a tone of a neighborhood meeting. And I think what really helped in having a facilitator was it kind of steered it away from just a complaint driven. A lot of what we get are complaints or issues, whether it's potholes, plowing snow, depending on what it is, branches, all the type of things that we provide. Having that facilitator, it really kind of directed discussion, and I think the direction the mayor wanted to go about really getting out into some of the deeper issues, a lot of the information out of people that I don't think we normally get in a neighborhood meeting. So I think by having a facilitator and your role, it was a tremendous help. And I also think just from the first group of meetings to the second group of meetings, there was sort of a change in tone and direction of the meeting. And I think part of that is just the direction you and the mayor set and moving it forward.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Not everyone's familiar with the structure. Would one of you want to take a swing at telling what we did?
Sure. As far as the planning or the coordination, I just left it up to my staff to coordinate that. But really, we got in touch with the impacted leaders. Of course, the aldermen were the first ones we reached out to. And then, just stated what we'd like to do. And they left it to us to, I think, the first go-around to find the location. So we just found the location and common time to meet. The real, I think, what we need to build upon is how to reach out to the community, because really it's about community engagement. It's only as beneficial as people being involved. And you really could tell when we went to the different ward meetings somewhere in the morning, Saturday morning, or it might have been the evening, but you could tell which aldermen were engaged due to the turnout. And so we use social media ourselves to get the word out. But really, when we first went into it, we just took that leap of faith. I think, we did have the initial planning meeting, but what holds government back, and maybe some organizations, is that fear of trying. This was something new. When they asked, well, what do you hope to get from that? The media would always ask me, what do you hope to get from this? I said, well, greater coordination. I mean, I just wasn't sure. But what we found out is, as Director Mahoney pointed out, the public really wanted to have that venue to express their opinion. But as far as the real coordination, I think the communications director, Julia Fever, could expound upon that a little bit.
We debated on how do you start a meeting, because the meeting will set the tone of everything. And so I think it was suggested at first to say, do we ask, what do we want to change about the city? And Jan said, no, don't do that, because it's going to set a very negative tone. So we talked about, what do you love about Springfield? And I think that really got people engaged about talking about things that you don't think about every day, but really makes what people love about Springfield. Education came out of that, our Lincoln sites, the fair, just different things. And it was nice that neighbors were sharing that with other neighbors. So it gave us a good list. And then I think as that discussion kind of changed, then it turned into issues to say, well, if they loved education, maybe it was out by UIS, they wanted some more roadways out there to make sure it's a better access to downtown. And so it really opened up the dialogue. So I actually had a computer there. I typed in all the feedback. We also had Bonnie and a couple other people who jotted down the notes, and so everybody could see what everyone was saying. And at the end of the meeting, we came up with the themes. So whether it was sidewalks, infrastructure, safety, those were kind of the main themes. And we put it back to everybody to say, is this was what you're hearing? As the meeting were built, I think it was neat because I think we started with like 50 or 60 people attending. Ward 1, we had over 100 people attend. And so I think it just kept building and building. And then you had people coming from their ward to other wards because they were curious to hear what you had to say. And I think it was interesting for Jan personally to hear just what other neighborhoods hear. And I think it puts in perspective your own neighborhood. And I thought that was important as well.
From my perspective, I was the external consultant, and the OD Rob is the external consultant. And I think what I realized is that as a consultant, internal or external, you change the process when you walk in the room, and it changes you. So it's really important to keep that in mind about what's happening inside me as a consultant when I'm working with people. But what really struck me, I adored this process. I hope I'll get asked to do it again, although Bonnie doesn't want to do it again. The price is right. what really struck me, and I had heard what the mayor said about his vision for the city, and there are such different needs and feelings between the wards, between Ward 1, which includes some of downtown. It also includes southeast is Ward 2, though.
Ward 2,
That's 2.
that's
But Ward 2 and Ward 1, they have a lot of different concerns than Ward 10, which is out on the west side. But it's important for everyone in the city to know what's happening in those other wards. Julia, talk a little bit about what you did with the data. And before we go to the second phase, which was very cool, I think, but talk about what you did with the data that you pulled in. Bonnie wrote everything down and the themes.
One last thing, if I could, on the meeting, what was important, and it was a venue for the public to give feedback. And so a lot of times they would get on their soapbox and start asking questions, about the budget or what have you. And it was hard not to respond, but that was the process. Because if we would have jumped in, it would have derailed, would have went a different direction. So it was important for us just to sit back, and Janet did a great job keeping people on task. And if, people got bogged down in a certain topic, then she'd say, well, okay, we have that noted on the flip chart, and then we're going to move on. And she really kept that conversation going. But for us being, you have to keep an open mind and can't take things personal. And what we're trying to do is find out the public's feelings on how they perceived city government and how we were providing services to the public.
Yep. And the mayor, most of the time, followed the rules and didn't come in answer. Most of the time.
That's right.
But there were a couple of times. It's hard to resist when people are saying things that are not true. But it's good to know. You just have to listen. So would you talk about the data a little bit, Julia?
Well, I did, as I said, I typed everything out, and then we broke it down in Excel documents based on wards. And then I think Mark and I first met to talk about, there were some low-hanging fruits. There were some neighborhoods who said, we just want
Garbage
trash
cans,
cans along South Grand, or we want our alley, we missed a pothole and we want that repaired. And so it was neat to hear feedback. Mark took it back to his staff right away after ward meetings, and I'd get an email from someone who would say, thank you so much, my alley got cleaned up. And I felt like that was the best way, that Mark took the lowest hanging fruit he could, and so people noticed right away that we were taking what they were saying to heart. So then we broke down the data. We tried to figure out, some of the stuff just wasn't city related. We got School District 186, so we shared that information with them. The Springfield Mass Transit District, that doesn't fall under us, but we had a lot of concerns about the bus service, so we would share that information with them. And animal control was a very big issue as well. So we had to share that data with those organizations. And then we tackled how we were going to do it, whether it was handed to a different department, or if it was achieved, if it was long-term strategy, if it's something that we could have funding for. And Mark probably can talk to more about the capital improvement plan after that. But then we sat down with each alderman and we said, this is what we've heard, this is where we are in the process. Is there anything you want added? Because I know with politicians, you make a promise and you say this is what you want to do when you take office. So we wanted to make sure that if they had visions as well, that was shared. But these ward plans were really from the residents. It wasn't. We wanted to make sure that was clear and that their voices were heard in these documents and that we were reacting to those documents. Mm-hmm. But one of the biggest pieces of data, I think, was the capital improvement plan.
It was, and a lot of the information we gathered was information I think that we had some knowledge of. It was in our capital improvement plan, but it was really good to get the feedback from the residents. And like Janet touched on, it's amazing how different some of the needs and wants are ward by ward. I mean, on the certain parts of town, mass transit came up. In other parts of town, it wasn't mentioned. Job creation, youth programs, a lot of things that the mayor's office and working with the different departments, we've been able to follow through. And I think an important piece of this is the follow-up meetings. We did our second round, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And then I know the mayor plans to continue doing these, is to really show people that we are listening and also responding and also explaining things, why we can't. Some of these capital improvement plans cost millions of dollars we just don't have the funding for, and try to explain that and really try to set priorities where we can spend some of that money, or if we can't completely fix the problem, at least come up with some solutions, like the trash cans, the potholes, those are all low-hanging fruit. Probably the potholes need to be filled again, but they were things we could take care of pretty quickly. And I think people like to see that not only are you listening to them, but something's getting done. And I think that's really the key part of this. And then going forward is going to have to continue to show that. And Julia, by collecting the data and putting it out there on the website and communicating that at the meetings, it was a tremendous part of this process, I think.
And what's interesting is when we first started, people view Springfield as all-encompassing. So we heard about Springfield Park District, Springfield Mass Transit District, even though we have no control over those governmental bodies. But it gave us the avenue to document the information and then share that with those particular leaders of government entities. And so it really helped forge a relationship between us and hopefully working better together. But the other thing I did propose, and I think sanitary district, Springfield Sanitary District,
Yes, they did it.
you know, I got a little perturbed. I said, well, they shouldn't even have Springfield in their name. You know, it shouldn't even say that. That way people would understand who's in charge, because we have no control. It's appointed by usually the county board. But the Springfield Sanitary District did change their name, and I think it's, what's it called now?
Metro.
Metro, yeah.
Yeah, so it really is more reflective of what they do. And I think that's part of the problem with Springfield is there is that disconnect between governmental entities, and I think we could do a better job of coordinating services and providing better services if we work more closely together with regards to that.
And I do think, oh, sorry,
Okay.
was, the ward meetings were also teachable moments for residents, because I didn't realize this coming in. Chatham Road, I don't know if you want to, is not all of Springfield, and some of it is Jerome, and I don't know if you want to talk
Well,
about
I
that.
think pointing out some of those jurisdictional issues was very important, because a lot of people didn't know that. And I think another important piece of this whole thing, even though there's different jurisdictions, the mayor's approach has been, it's not that we say, hey, call the sanitary district or call the park district. What he did is took that information, Julia tracked it, and we reached out. The mayor called them, or he designated a department to talk to them. And so that communication was started, and we were asking for those results. And I think it probably means a little more if the mayor's talking to the sanitary district as opposed to just telling somebody randomly just call them. So I think that's an important part of that too, not just punning. We actually tried to follow up on some of those issues, even though they weren't the city's responsibility.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, just to give you an idea about the scope, I don't know how many people we had, how many, did you ever, on the first set of meetings, did you do Bonnie, did you have a head count?
I mean,
There
think on
were
average
probably
it was about
1,000
30
people.
to 40.
Yeah.
well, that
the
was the
first go
second one,
round.
the very first one, but I think we went up to, there was over 100 at the Ward 1 meeting.
Right, so we probably had
at
between
four.
800 and 1,000 city residents that participated in the first set of meetings. And the spreadsheet that contained, we started with a spreadsheet that had everything in it, so you could look at all of it together. And there were over 700 lines of information that came in. And then they were divided into the themes, and I didn't look at those, didn't write them down, but transportation was one, safety, infrastructure, communications. I think there ended up being
Economic development.
economic development. Yep, we had about 7 different themes, and so that gave everybody and you as OD folks, it's really important to have the information. I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but you can't emphasize enough how important it is to put it in a data form, make it concrete so that you can have something to go with. And I think that what the staff and the mayor did on this was really an amazing
And what's
result.
interesting about that, it's a work in progress, because we didn't know where the road was going to take us. Again, it goes back to you have to take that initial step. And so you're getting bombarded with all these remarks. And then, of course, Julia fell on her to document it all. But, you know, it seems insurmountable until you categorize it and then split it into achievable parts. And that made it more realistic. So we did post it on the website so people could view them. They still can. It's still up there. But it was really important to give feedback back to the public or the individuals giving you the information, so they just know that you're just not collecting data, you're actually doing something with it.
Sure. So that was, the first set of meetings happened in October and November of 2015, And Amy Lally did 3 of them. I should give Amy a shout out. We had 10 meetings and she did 3 of them. I think she got the one that had the most activity with regard to animal control. I didn't, and
She brought the animals out.
I was
Yes.
really looking forward to that meeting this time, and nobody talked about it when we got to that ward this time. So I was like, I missed all the good stuff. Not all the good stuff. So we did that in October, November, got the data together. Now let's move on, because this is a little bit like an action research project, if you think about phases. So the next phase we did in August and September of 2016, so about 10 months later. Talk about how that evolved and how your impressions, Mayor, about
Well, the
those.
first one was to gather the information, and of course, I made the pledge that we're going to do 2 a year. And of course, my staff goes, "What?" Because you're talking 10 meetings, so that's 20 meetings. And it's when we just got over the police chief selection. So we already went through this process once when we had public forums to select the next police chief. And so it was really a great time crunch. But it was important to, first time around, it's just going out there, trying to get the feedback from the public. The second go around was, okay, here's what was stated, here's what's been addressed, and here's where the direction we need to go. So it was really important to get that feedback just from the standpoint from our upcoming budget, the direction we want to take in trying to address some of the more long-term needs of our community.
I
Great.
think, and then Mark and I got pulled into it the most because our items, communications and public works, were the biggest issues every ward had. And I think that's why we worked closely on the project to figure out ways that we can combat that. Through the ward meetings, I didn't realize that there was over 60 to 80 neighborhood associations in Springfield alone. And that the city was not utilizing that information to help communicate out. The biggest issue was that they didn't know what was going on in the city. They didn't know when branch pickup was happening, when their sidewalks were being done. And so it was trying to figure out how to collect all that neighborhood association information to use them to our advantage, actually. So, and then the other issue was our website. Our website was really not good. And so that was 2 of my tasks going into it before we had the next set of ward meetings. We really had to address how to better communicate with the residents and the neighborhood associations.
Well, and just, I mean, Julia's kind of underplaying. In 10 months, she revamped the website and created a way for 70 neighborhood associations to be connected with the city every week. You know, that's real, that is really, that's strong, results-oriented use of the data. And Mark, you started talking about how it was different, how
Well,
it
yeah,
felt
and
different.
I think something else that came out of that that's actually in Julie's ballpark as well is these meetings, the limitations are the people that actually attend the meeting. I mean, it's an older demographic. We're not getting a lot of younger people.
Yeah.
And from maybe it's the nature of our public works business is we knew a lot of the people at the meetings because they were calling us a lot of the times. But it was sort of, the way it was set up, it was sort of a different dynamic between us, and it was, I think, a better interaction. But I think the other piece that came out of this, knowing there's limitations, I think what Julia did is with the neighborhood communication, association communication, but also expanding our social media outreach, some of those things to get to some of these different people out there that are probably not getting their information the old-fashioned way or even attending these meetings. But it was highlighted in these meetings because you kind of got the idea that those folks were not there. So.
And what we should point out is usually in government we throw out terms broadly like transparency, communication, and really you have to dive into it because that's not necessarily the case on communications, or that's why you have to keep an open mind, not take things personally, especially being the communications director. Because on the communication side, what we found out, a lot of it, if they're in Springfield, they think it's a Springfield city issue, and it is more jurisdictional. And so that's what we had to determine is, especially in Ward 1, that's why we annexed in the lake properties, is because around the lake, some people were in the city, some people were outside the city, even though the city owned it. And so that came out in the ward meeting pretty clear that, governmental entities like to point the fingers. So if they can, get rid of the problem, saying it's not my issue, that's what we tend to do. And that's the barriers we're trying to remove. And so going back to the communication side, is a lot of it was due to jurisdictions not taking ownership. So this way we took ownership and we really disseminated the information to the appropriate parties to try to address it as best as possible. Going back to the weekly correspondence with the neighborhood associations, that was the big part of it. Neighborhood associations didn't know when branch pickups were and other items, so Julia put that together, and each week puts out all the information that might be of interest to the neighborhood associations. And so it's been a great avenue to communicate to the neighborhoods, and I think the next go-around, that's why we didn't see such of an outcry with regards to issues when we came back around during the second round, because believe me, I know CWLP, the utility was afraid to go to some of these meetings because, raising rates or whatever, but really I think they found the importance of it. But the second go around is we thought we'd hear more problems, but we didn't. We heard, complimentary things, and so it really goes back to really dissecting the data, seeing what we had responsibility for, and communicating or educating the public on the direction we needed to take, as well as other entities. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, Mark or Julia, would you, one of you, talk about how the structure of the second set of meetings was different, how it evolved from the first set?
With the help of Jan, she really made sure that we were going to report out the data, that we really were going to say, this is what we've done, this is what we're working towards. And, how do we present that without always doing handouts or the best way? So we knew that we're actually going through the regional planning, through Springfield Sangamon County Regional Planning. The city is doing a new comprehensive plan. And so we wanted to use this as a way to, 2037? That's what we're looking towards. So to figure out ways to incorporate what we heard from the ward meetings in order to do our city planning as well. So we want to incorporate that into it, report out the data, but also get feedback, because we felt that people who came to the first round would be expecting to be able to bring their issues up. So it was nice to see when we put the news release out that we were going to have these second rounds. Jennifer Gill, the superintendent of District 186, said we will have, if she was not at the meetings, she would send a representative of her team to the meetings. SMTD always had a representative at the meetings. And the county made sure that they had somebody representatives. Those were the three entities that made sure that they were there. And also I believe almost every department at the city made sure they had a representative there. So I felt good that people thought the process was really working and the information was valuable. Not to pick on Mark. Mark had boards, so he made sure he had a lot of stuff that people had questions on of what streets were being done, where things were going. So we always had to tote in Mark's boards.
Yeah, you took them away from me.
Yeah, I took them away from me.
I think the structured way the meeting was approached, and I didn't always appreciate it because I was kind of receiving it, as the mayor let everybody had the opportunity to vent first. So a lot of their concerns, where I don't think they had as many as the first round. Obviously, when they do, it's usually Public Works. So it was that period, and then what the mayor did would come up and really kind of speak to what we've done and kind of lay out some of the things that are going on and what his plans were. And then what Julia talked about a little bit with that comprehensive plan is really give people what's their vision for Springfield. They had the opportunity to share, what would you like Springfield to be in, 20 years or 10 years, those kind of things. So it was a lot different, I think, than the first round, really, because there was a lot of different pieces to it, and I felt like everybody seemed to have their piece that they were there for, and it flowed pretty well.
I think we struggled. The first meeting, we tried to report out first what we have done, and then it kind of brought the meeting down, because then when we were trying to get interaction, everyone was pretty quiet.
Which is fine from my end.
Yeah, it was fine from my end. So we decided, let's scale it back and figure out a way. So through the comprehensive plan, I think we said, what words or terms do you use to describe Springfield? Or in one word, what would you describe Springfield as today? And then after everybody gave their feedback, we ended the meeting with 20 years from now, if you have family in town or guests in town, what would you love to show them? In one word or one thing, how would you love to describe Springfield? So I think it helped us see where people want to go. And it was always really exciting because people do want to be innovative. I know we say people don't like change and change is hard, but all in all, I think everybody wanted to elevate our historic sites, and everybody really wanted to push for millennials and push for job creation. and technology. So I think it left everybody thinking, very positively.
Yeah, my observation in the between the two, and it's what really began to change, not change my thinking, but develop further thinking. I think that the process that the mayor has set up is really about accountability, but accountability on the part of the citizenry too, because this is a direction we really consciously talked about as the second set of meetings, to create an awareness on the part of the people that attended that it's their city, they are responsible for bringing the information forward, to working with their neighborhood associations, so you saw a better, I think the information we received from the citizens, the second set, was more refined. They had, it wasn't so raw. It had some work, done to it. And so I think to me, that was a really important change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were more engaged, I think, from the general public, and it really showed the true partnership that it's representative government. And so really, whatever you're trying to do with your organization or what have you, that's the key, is just to move forward with the process. I mean, you'll never have everything in place. I'm a big fan of gray areas. I like to be mobile, and so I don't like to get locked in. And so that's what this process really did. If you're waiting to line everything up so it's perfect, it's not going to happen. You're better off just, going out there and really being adaptable or flexible, so you can really move any direction you'd like to. Because really, we're here as far as what we did. It's government for the people. So this is a way for them to kind of tell us what type of government would they like. And again, it really started with the chief when we did the police chief selection. We ended up keeping Chief Winslow on, but you ask him to go through the process. I mean, he was agonized over that whole process, but it gave the public a chance to tell us what would they like to see in a police chief. And so I think when it was all said and done, he felt like he was a stronger person for that. And we're going through the same process with the city, with the individual wards, and then collectively when we did the one-word ideas for Springfield, it tied everything together nicely, so we could see what they thought today and what they would like to see in the future. So it really helps get their feedback and really get their buy-in for moving forward as a community together.
Okay, it's about 10 minutes left before we said we would wrap up for the day, and I would love to give you all a chance to ask questions of our panel. I didn't tell them that was going to happen probably, but...
If you have sidewalk concerns or streets.
There's a website. So, yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much. I think you took a really innovative approach, and I was wondering, and by the way, I'm Dawn Newman from St. Louis, so
great.
I'm hoping that we can take some of what you're doing and
you a
help
Cub
the
fan?
city of St. Louis.
Are you?
I'm teasing you. That's right.
No comment. So what I'd like to hear is what sort of new solutions or ideas did you hear? You talked about people stating what they liked, maybe what they wanted to see in the future, and then maybe what some of the issues are. Did you also hear solutions that people signed up for, like that they could actually be involved in creating the solutions?
Well, as far as the immediate one was the communications with the neighborhoods, but I'll let Julia dive into that. The other item that we have are capital improvement projects, so that's one of the items we've tried to throw out. And we did give a few people commenting, because nobody wants to say, raise my taxes. But they did say, what was interesting is they wanted it to be shared across the board, not necessarily on Springfield residents. So, to me, that's you'd have to take a look at revenue sources that others visiting our area would be able to contribute to. So that was one aspect that was kind of interesting. I don't know if there's...
I think I took away from one of the wards is a gentleman said, we know this all costs money, and nobody wants to say that. So the idea was, if we do this again, to come back with the 10 big projects and to say, these are the 10 projects, but we only have funding for 2 or 3 of them. What are you going to do? Let's prioritize. What's important to you? Is it dealing with synchronizing of lights, or is it doing an extension? And really kind of put it back to say, you know, we'd love to do it all, but this is what it's going to cost, or this is what it looks like. Mark did show a chart about taxes and how we compare to communities around us.
And the gentleman you're talking about, I think, is that from that chart, it showed the similar community, like Bloomington, Normal, Peoria, Rockford, similar size to our city, showed what their tax burden was, the variety of local taxes, and where we are in the city of Springfield. And generally, compared to those, we're fairly low. We presented that, and then we did get feedback. The gentleman she's speaking to, I think, said, you know, well, you showed us there are solutions for these infrastructure programs. Maybe we can't do them all, but you have some priorities now. It's up to you to come back with us and then bounce it off of us. So really, in some ways, there was an interaction, and they kicked it back to the elected officials to come with a plan. And that's something the mayor's kind of set up through the budget process to start that discussion from those ward meetings and move towards those solutions. So there are solutions out there, and I think what they did, they helped validate those options. And now the next step, really, I think, through the budget process is for the council and the mayor, obviously, to come up with those, and then I imagine we'll be speaking to those at the next round of ward meetings.
Yes,
So.
and I do think the other thing was the neighborhood associations, that neighborhood associations were owning up or telling individuals who stood up and said, I didn't know about this. They said, well, you know, you have a neighborhood association, you're not active, and you need to be active. And they did give us suggestions the first time around to say, I think it's Bloomington who has a landlord-tenant program. Is there some of those components? So nobody really said, and I don't know, you know, I'll take that project on. We've had suggestions, but we haven't gone through with any of those.
And there were ideas from people who moved into the community,
Yeah.
and who loved the community, and they said, well, I was in San Francisco. I think one couple moved from San Francisco, and they said, you know, we did that. And so it's all resources. You can see where that brings information from the community to help the administration get ideas they may not have been exposed to.
And that was interesting, having people from the outside provide comments, because usually long-term residents of Springfield, we beat ourselves up a lot. You know, we don't think we're as good as what we are. I think Springfield sells itself short. But having individuals that were new to the area express their opinion and say, wow, you have things good here, I think that opened up people's eyes with regards to that. But Janet's right. There's some ideas that came forward. But as far as solutions, that's what we'll probably take the next go-around, is certain ideas, especially in different wards, if it's specific to a ward, and throw it out there again like we did with the capital improvements plan on how there could be potential resolutions or ideas for solving those problems that we're trying to address.
Yeah. Any other questions? Did we have any other?
Do you have other methods of surveying your citizens other than the board?
On the comprehensive plan, we did send out just to get feedback. And the comprehensive plan, real quick, it's our plan moving forward for zoning. So it's really important that residents provide feedback, because, you know, if an area is going to be zoned for business or residential, that's when we want to get the feedback, because then we'll put out a 20-year plan or 10-year plan for those areas all around Springfield. So there was a survey that was put out. I think 5,000 went out directly, and it was handled through UIS. And then we also did on the plaza, they did surveys, or in community groups. Some of the members went out and spoke to individuals and tried to get feedback from the general public in that regards.
And then just through the website and social media, we get comments all the time. But they did planners on the plaza, so they had a color code if you were a visitor, and they had a different posted color code if you're a resident. They said, "Are you a business or are you a resident or a visitor? What would you love to see in Springfield?" And they wrote it. And so we created this board on the plaza of ideas that people had, whether they're a visitor or a resident. Yes, but then through the website, through social media, we've gotten feedback. And I've had a couple neighborhood associations say it would be great, or they'd be willing to partner with the city on revamping Neighborhood Watch. Neighborhood Watch was something that they'd like to see brought back, and how can we partner with the police department on that? Or they talked about, there was another program that they wanted to bring back. So that's kind of how we gauge it.
Well, and probably our biggest, since Julia's been here in the last year, I think probably our social media presence in the city has went from almost non-existent to whatever it is now. And I don't know how many followers we have, but that's probably the biggest piece of our communications citywide, is it not?
Yes,
How many people are...
and I think with Twitter, I think that's the next phase for city government, is that they're not used to doing customer service through social media, and a lot of big companies do responses, but I get tweets through the city of Springfield from people who are coming in from out of town, who are visiting, who have kids, and how are they going to, you know, what's open for kids, what would you suggest for the activities in December? And I think it's really a missing platform, and I think that's where I'd like to take it next, because if we're going to start being the hub where maybe new residents are coming to, that's how we created our website, for residents, for businesses, to try to get them to the places they need to be without getting convoluted in our language of public works, city water, light, and power. So.
And the other areas we're going to tap into, you know, specific to like our utility, we've had public forums with regards to that, or pensions, you know, if there's specific issues we're trying to address. So we've had public forums and draw in the individuals that are experts in that field. But with these ward meetings, the other step that we're going to take is with the younger people, millennials, and try to get their feedback in some type of venue, and then the business community, because we'll look at targeted sectors using the medical community. We probably call in those leaders in that specific area so we can find out obstacles they may be facing, or, you know, area or direction they'd like to see the city go that would help them. And so we're going to use that business piece as well.
Okay, one more quick question, Josh, or?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kazim Abbott. My question is with respect to the education. Do you guys have any initiatives to help young people graduate with less debt, and anything for entrepreneurship in the Springfield area?
People graduating with less debt. Was there anything the city is in?
Well, I'm a big fan of Lincoln Land Community College. Personally, I'm a graduate there, so I'm a big firm believer in staying local. But actually, I'll speak personally from my children's standpoint. I did Illinois College, Illinois, and so, you know, with the community college aspect, because I think when they're freshmen or sophomores, a lot of them don't know what they want to do, and that's a great way to get started, is through your community college. And then I come from the banking arena, and both my sons worked in banking as tellers because that's what they look to, and it really gives you that background. But that's me from a personal note. But for the ones that currently have debt, that's an issue that needs to be addressed, and it's a tough one because, you know, I think what we need to do as a city is create the jobs. I think that's where you turn around the pension issue, the costs with local government and others, is to do job creation. And so a lot of our focus on economic development will be the inner core of Springfield, because if you drive around the borders of the city, it's really growing. But the inner core is where you have the greatest propensity for property tax increment being improved. And so that's our targeted area, is economic development. So we are partnering with our higher ed and our unions. We did pass a local labor ordinance where if we're spending money on a project, they have to provide so many jobs locally to go along with those projects. But it all goes hand in hand with regards to let's educate our workforce to the jobs that we want to fill. And that's why it's important to get the feedback from the businesses to find out what are their workforce needs. And then we should be educating our children. These are the job opportunities, whether it's in the city or medical community or whatever the job would be. These are the opportunities for them. So if they go on to the post-secondary education, they are getting out of there and then hopefully finding employment.